Welcome back. Today I'm talking about what we can do when we notice that a conversation is going sideways and how to get it back on track. So, when a conversation is going sideways, it's that moment where you just feel that something's a little bit off, or maybe someone's body language changes, or there's just a palpable tension that enters the room. And these moments are really critical points in a conversation where they're choice points, where we can either step in and take some action that might realign the conversation or open things up, or they can be disconnection points. And so often what happens is when we encounter these awkward moments where something's going sideways, we don't know what to do, and so we rely on kind of our coping mechanisms. So maybe we get really aggressive and we stand our ground, or maybe we back off, we become like we're tiptoeing, we become more shy. And no matter what, when we are compensating in those moments, it does not tend to lead to connection. So when a conversation is going sideways, there are a few things that I really love to implement. The first one is a tool called a connection request. And a connection request is just a present moment gauge on the level of connection that's happening in the conversation. So it sounds something like, how are you feeling right now hearing this? Or maybe, I'm feeling like maybe we're not on the same page anymore. Would you let me know where you're at right now? Or it might be something like, I'm worried that what I just said either hasn't made sense or that I didn't communicate it well. Could you tell me what you're hearing? So it's a present moment request to ask the other person to let you know where they are in the conversation. And it might feel a little bit unconventional at first. It's not often done in our day-to-day interactions, but it really has the power to pause things and give both parties a chance to see where they're at and to see what makes sense moving forward. I love connection requests because they often will catch something that I was sensing but I couldn't put my finger on it. And if the other person's willing to let me in on their experience or where they're going astray in the conversation or what triggered them, then we can find our way back to each other in that moment. So they're a really powerful tool, and they may feel a bit vulnerable, a bit awkward when you're doing them. And I often will notice like my heart rate goes up when I make a connection request. I feel a bit uncomfortable in my body, but the result is so worth it because it really allows us, like I said, to find our way back to each other. Another thing you can do if a conversation is going sideways is you can do kind of an energy check for yourself. So one of the things that can send a conversation sideways is when somebody senses that the words I'm saying are not matching the energy that I'm bringing. So I might say some words that are sounding really collaborative and really nice, but my energy is reading as a little bit adversarial, for example. And so when this is the case, people tend to withdraw a little bit. They tend to get defensive or back off. And when that's happening, that's one of those moments when you might feel that something's off and it's going sideways. So what you can do is, whether you sense this in yourself or another person, you can slow down and just check in. Like, how close to my own authenticity am I right now? And it doesn't mean that I have to find my way fully back to my 100% authentic response in that moment. It just means that I'm checking in with myself, and maybe what I can do is take the small step of saying, I'm noticing that I'm feeling fill in the blank, or I'm noticing, and just self-report out what's happening. Because what can start to rebuild trust and have people come back into alignment in a conversation is when they feel that we're being open and direct and clear with our experience. When they feel that we're withholding something or we're trying to manipulate the conversation, people naturally will move away from us. So you can do that little energy check. Okay, is there a gap between like how I'm behaving and how I'm feeling on the inside, and how could I narrow that gap a little bit? Maybe it's reporting out something I'm noticing in myself. Maybe it's just an internal check-in where I can kind of reroute myself toward a more honest, direct, and clear way of expressing myself. Now, the last thing that can be really helpful is just simply to agree that in this moment something is off and we want to revisit this conversation at another time. And I can't tell you how often this happens, that when we get in the thick of it, we're in that moment of disconnection or awkwardness, that people just try to power through, they try to push through. And what we often forget is available to us is just to acknowledge that something is off, and if we can't put our finger on it, if we have tried different methods of trying to understand what's going on and it's not working, it's often better to just acknowledge that together and say, you know what, let's come back to this when we've both had a little bit of time to reflect. And so it's really useful to implement this tactic after you've already tried some other ways of getting things back on track. I've been in plenty of conversations where I've used all the tools in my toolkit, and for whatever reason, something had come up for me or the other person or both of us that was just, we were not going to get underneath it in that moment. And when that happens, it really serves to take space to come back to the table when both people have a better understanding of what's happening for them or where things went awry, and be able to connect about it in a more self-reflective way. So if you notice a conversation going sideways, you might try a connection request, asking someone in a vulnerable way. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but asking someone what's going on for them, what they're hearing, where things may have fallen off. And then the second tactic is to notice if there's a gap between the energy you're bringing and the behaviors that you're doing or the words you're saying, and look for ways to narrow that gap. The third one is just to take a little bit of space to acknowledge verbally that something seems off, or that maybe one or more people in the conversation needs a little breather to come back with a bit more awareness. Now there's one final thing that I want to name, and that's a dynamic that can take place that sometimes sends conversations sideways. This dynamic is the clash between intention and impact. So in every conversation we have an intention and then we have an impact. And often the places where things get awkward or there's a disconnect is when our intention is not matching the impact we're having on the other person. So this may be something to be aware of and maybe even to check for, and you can use that in the form of a connection request or just asking a question like, I have the sense that what I've just said maybe isn't landing the way I wanted or the way that I intended. What's going on for you? So I wanted to add that final layer of awareness for you as you try out these different tools, that if your intention is maybe not matching your impact, that's a moment to become curious about your impact and whether or not you agree with the impact you've had, to just be open to hearing what it was, because that's going to be the doorway to get your conversation back on track. Thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next time.